All right, well, it looks like we're up and running. I think I got the stream working. I think I got everything set up. So, welcome to the stream. It's new, it's an idea. I'm bored. I'm social distancing and dealing with the situation that's affecting everyone around the world. So, trying to make the best of it and trying to take some of the time here instead of watching Netflix to try to create some content to help everybody out and kind of get an introduction to mass transit. So I know a lot of people who are probably going to look at this have already heard of mass transit, but mass transit is a lightweight service bus or kind of a distributed application framework for the .NET runtime, whether that's .NET Core or still the .NET framework. It's built in C Sharp. It's mostly targeted at C Sharp developers, but I know people have used it in other languages. So yeah, so I wanted to start off kind of really at the basics. I mean, the information to understand if you're looking for information on mass transit and have never seen it before, masstransitproject.com with a hyphen in the middle has all of the documentation. The documentation is recently been refreshed. It's now built using ViewPress and has a pretty extensive set of information around everything around mass transit is pretty much documented in here now. So if you want to find out about any of the things you see here and you want to get a little more detail, definitely check that out. I'm going to go ahead and keep that around, but the first few things about me, I am the main contributor of the Mass Transit project. I've been running it for 12 years now, and I've managed to keep it up and running, and it's used a lot. It's a fun project. It's a hobby that happens to run a lot of businesses across the entire planet, so that's kind of cool. Um, yeah, enough about me. You're here to see code, so let's do that. So what I've done so far, um, first I use a Mac. I use JetBrains Rider, so you won't see any Visual Studio here. You won't see any Windows diagrams. You'll see everything built on the Mac. I tend to do a lot of stuff in the terminal as well, so you're going to kind of get a glimpse into the workflow behind, how mass transit is built, developed, and maintained. Um, yeah, so what I've started so far, all I did was I went into a folder, I created a .NET new SLN using, and I called this one Sample Twitch. Created a new web API project because I really wanted to start at the very basics here. And I mean, I'll probably do multiple streams with this and I'll just kind of go until I get tired of yammering on. But I wanted to kind of start just bare bones to kind of let everybody kind of see where it's at and build up from there and kind of get the thought process. So that's all I've done so far is created a solution, created a project, put the information in there. I think it did a .NET Restore. Great, awesome. I ran it to make sure it worked, and then I opened that up in Rider. So you can see within Rider, I have the solution, I have the sample API. If I go into Program CS, you can see we have the basic startup stuff. A lot of unused references. That's awesome. So I'll clean that up real quick because I tend to be OCD when it comes to code. So I'll just clean that up. Be easy. Nice. Great. Awesome. Within our startup, you can see it's just a very basic standard startup. Again, this is just the template right out of the box. And it's just a API project. It is using .NET Core 3.1, which I think weather forecast is their default sample here. So you can see the controller here is just doing that. It does seem to be using the root. I'm fine with that. So if we go out and actually run it, just to make sure that everything works and is happy, we can just do a .NET run. Okay, looks like it came up. If we go back over here and refresh the weather forecast, there we have the weather forecast. So we know that our API application is running, very basic stuff, but starting from that very basic level there. We'll kill this, go back into Rider. So getting mass transit in your project. Everything is deployed through NuGet, so we're going to open up the NuGet package manager. I am going to install masstransit.aspnet core. AspNet Core is a project that's made to integrate with Web API projects. It references everything that you'll need aside from a transport. So it'll have your dependency injection, it'll have your logging, all of that will be in present. So I'm going to add that in. The Looks like it added that in there. Okay. Now I'm going to go into the startup because startup is where I want to bring things in first. And within configure services, this is where we're going to configure our service collection. So I'm going to just make some space in here. I'm going to call add MassTransit. Now this is going to set up the container configuration and all of the details for MassTransit. This is all documented on the website, but this is going to allow me to do things like add consumers, add sagas, add any of the information or any of the message handlers that I want in the project. Now, MassTransit has support for a number of different transports. It has an in-memory transport. It supports RabbitMQ, ActiveMQ, Azure Service Bus, and Amazon SQS. But to start off, I want to start off real simple. A guy I've known for a while, Caleb, said, hey, why don't you start with Mediator, since Mediator is kind of a new feature and it's entirely in memory. So I thought about doing that. So I'm going to think first, and I've never used this sample with ASP.NET API before, so I'm going to kind of branch on that. I'm going to create my own domain for this, because the weather forecast sample just doesn't make a lot of sense. But first, I'm going to have to create a message contract. So even if you go back and look at the documentation here, one of the first things it talks about is messages. Messages is like how you define your message contracts. I'm going to use an interface for a message contract. So I'm going to create a new project. And this is just going to be a class library. It is going to be my sample.contracts. It's just going to be a net standard 2.0 project, C# sample.contracts, create, boom. The reason I create this as a separate project is because I'm going to be breaking things up, pretty typical there. Sample.contracts, and I'm going to create my first contract. Now my first message contract is going to be, and we're going to go with my pretty traditional domain here, is submit order. Submit order, I'm going to rename to match the file type. Submit order is going to have an order ID. Why not? Let's have an order ID. Let's give it a timestamp. Let's go ahead and put a customer number here, which would identify our customer. And we'll just start with that to kind of begin. With that there, we're going to add a reference to that in our project. We are then going to create a consumer for that submit order. Now, my contracts is just going to have my message contracts in it. The controllers, that's your API controllers. I don't want to put any work in there. I want to kind of keep things separate at some point. So, like I said, I'm starting from like completely clean here. So we're going to be creating a number of different projects. We are going to have, and I'm just going to call this sample.components. Why not, right? This is just going to be a number of the different messaging components that I'm creating. Your names can be whatever you want it to. Doesn't matter to me. I'm just doing it because it's a great name. I'll get rid of this guy. Sample components is going to have a reference to contracts. And let's say I'll go ahead and create a folder in here because I want to be all nice and organized. And we'll say I'm going to have a consumers. So within here, I will add a class, and this will be my submit order consumer. I don't name all my consumers after my message contracts, but in this case I am. And it is going to consume the submit order message. Now, I will need to add some dependencies here because I haven't done it yet on this one. And in this case, I'm going to just get the raw MassTransit package because I don't want any transport stuff. I don't want anything tied to ASP.NET Core. I just want stuff that's related to MassTransit. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that in here. Now when I come in here, I'm going to get my using resolved. Let's get this out of the way. Okay. Now I've got to create my method. So iConsumer, if you want to look at it, pretty exciting. All it takes is it's a single method consume that takes the consume context of the message type. So when I go back into here, it's created that message for me. I have consume context. And now I can do what my consumer is going to do. Right now, I'm just going to simply create this async and leave it done for now. I'm not going to do anything in that consumer yet. The startup back here, you can see I have this add MassTransit. Now I want to be able to actually add this consumer for this submit order in here. So I will say config.add consumer, and I will put the submit order consumer. It's probably going to have to add a reference for that. And done. Okay. Fairly simple so far. Now I'm going to add a new controller for my order. This is going to be my order controller. And I'm going to cheat because I really don't remember how to do this kind of stuff. But I'm going to steal a bunch of code from here. I'm going to get rid of this. Ooh, I need that controller base. That looks pretty good. We'll keep that. And we don't need any of this stuff. Ooh, that was kind of nice though. I might steal that code too. I like that logger. That's kind of neat. So we'll rename that to a constructor. We're going to return nothing at this point. We are just going to turn an iAction result. Or actually, we're going to return a task iAction result because we're going to play nice. And this would be what? A post. We're just going to call this post. And for now, we're going to be really, really creative. We're going to just take whatever we get and deal with it. So what my intention here is to create an API controller that can actually call that submit order consumer. So if we go back to the startup, I now have a contract called submit order. I'm going to create a request client for submit order and add that to MassTransit. So that will register a client that knows how to send a submit order request. I have my consumer over here that is the submit order consumer. And I have the order controller that has to do something in here to get this. So we're going to make this async. Right now it does nothing. It's expecting a return. Obviously we would return okay, right? Everything's going to be great. Okay, I have no errors. Now, inside the controller, to use that request client, I'm going to add a controller dependency, request client of submit order. We will call this the submit order request client. Use a nice long name. Okay, now I'm going to actually initiate the send. I'm trying to remember how to do this. If I do a post, I have an ID. Let's just call it an ID. Probably need a model on here too, but I'm just going to put customer number and see if this works because I don't do API programming very much, but why not, right? Then let me see here. The request client is there. I have availability to it. So now I'm going to say their response equals await submit order request client dot get response. Oh, so I'm going to call submit order, and in this case, I want a response. Now, I don't have to get a response, and if I was firing and forgetting this, it really wouldn't matter. But in this case, I do want a response. I'm going to do this in kind of an RPC fashion, so I'm going to submit the order. I'm going to send that message, and I'm going to expect some sort of handler to give it back to me. So let's go back to the submit order consumer, and I'm going to create an order accepted message. And I'm going to say that the order has been accepted. Well, no, let's not say accepted. Let's call it something else. So we're going to go to submit order. We are going to create an interface of order submission accepted, because we've accepted the order submission, but the order might be invalid, it might be bogus, whatever. We want to keep our domain fairly broken up. So when they call submit order, we'll say the order submission was accepted. We'll include the order ID. We will also put a timestamp on it. We don't really need the customer number, but we should probably at least tell them something. In this case, it's almost a mirror image of what we just sent. We'll put that in its own file. And we will go back to the consumer, and now we are going to say await context.respond async order submission accepted. We are going to set the timestamp that we received that. Now, an interesting thing about the way this works is, so when you're doing messaging with MassTransit, I recommend interfaces for contracts. They tend to have no behavior because they aren't classes. The methods, it's easy to say the properties are all get only, and it makes it so that it just enforces a pattern, and it's one that I've always used. MassTransit has the ability to initialize these messages for you using an anonymous initializer, which is pretty common syntax across a lot of things. So if we look here at order submission accepted, and then we go back to our controller, we can see that we have to initialize some things. Now, one of the common issues that people say around MassTransit with using interfaces this way is I have no way to tell what the properties are if I'm missing any properties. Well, thankfully, MassTransit has a Roslyn analyzer that will do that for you. So I'm going to go down here and pick MassTransit.analyzers. I'm going to add it to my sample API project, and boom, now I'm done. Now you can actually see I have a green squiggle underneath here, which if I hit Alt-Enter, add missing properties, I now know what I'm supposed to put inside this message contract. So order ID, well, I got this ID, we'll use that. Timestamp, I'm going to use an initializer variable, so invar.timestamp, which is going to return a timestamp that is consistent throughout the message initializer. So if I reference this 3 or 4 times within the same message initializer, it would always be the same time versus copying datetime.now or datetime.utc now anywhere and having it be different values. Timestamp is also UTC by default because technically all of your timestamp style values should be UTC. Now, if you're doing date times that are relevant to an application like a user submitting an order, you would probably want to keep the date time offset of the user so that you knew that they submitted the order at 4 p.m. local time, because you may have rules or business rules that care about what the local time was for the customer. So something to think about there. I'm also going to pass this customer number here. At this point, I've created an initializer for the message. It's initialized, and it's going to create a proxy in the background for that message, for that submit order message, and I'm going to get the response of order submission accepted. If I go back to my consumer, which returns that response, I can see that all it's going to do is respond accepted now, because I'm not really caring what else is there. Now, an interesting thing about the consumer, besides the fact that it isn't using the analyzer right now. So if I go to the analyzer and I pick my entire solution and I see that analyzers is there, I can add that to my components as well. And now you'll see the squiggle there. Now that's one thing about the squiggle that's kind of annoying, is because technically I don't need the other two values because they're in the request, and the request message is automatically copied to the response. So I'm going to leave that there for now. Probably give myself a to-do to go fix that at some point. So now within my order controller, I have the response. Now the response type is a response of order submission accepted, which I'm going to crank that out of there. Instead of returning OK, now I'm going to return an OK of response.message. Now that's going to take the body of that message for that order submission accepted and return that back to the user. I think is JSON. I think that sounds about right. Okay, so now I've created a request client in my controller. So my controller now has the ability to submit a request and get a response back. I've created the submit order consumer, which is going to get that order and just right now do nothing. I've put that in the order controller. Now I have to go and actually figure out how I'm going to call this. Now, as was suggested, I'm going to do this very simply just using Mediator. So I'm going to say add Mediator, and I'm kind of done. That's all I have to do. So Mediator is an entirely in-memory version of the MassTransit runtime. So it allows you to register consumers, everything you want inside of the service. And I think this is all I have to do. I'm pretty sure. Wait, I might have to do one more thing. I might have to call x.configure endpoints. No, I think it automatically does it. I can't remember. We'll find out. I should read the docs. Okay. I'm going to build this. It's going to build. Make sure everything's good. I'm going to go out here and try to run it. I guess I could run it within Rider too, but I just don't do that too often. Okay, now I'm going to come over here. Now I know my weather forecast still works, but now I'm going to go to my order controller. And that page isn't working. 405 doesn't like that. How do I send a post? It's a good question. I should have thought of this beforehand. I got a better plan. I'm going to go here. Now we're going to have some fun. So I always do this on my projects because everybody wants to play nice. Curler Postman. Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah, appreciate that there's actually one person on. Curl would be great. How do I do curl? So how do I do a curl with a put? Did I do a put? Let's go back to my controller. Good question. It's an HTTP post of ID and customer number. I am going to manage my NuGet packages again, and I'm going to put nswag. nswag.asp.NET Core. Yes. So I am going to install Swagger so that I have OpenAPI on my API endpoint. And then I'm going to go back to startup. And this is where I'm going to have to pull from my cheat sheet here. So hold on just a second. I'm going to have to add this line. API site. And then I've got to snag 2 more lines to get these. And by doing that, let's see if we build. All right, so it looks good. Let's go back here. Let's see if it runs. So now if we come in here and we go to Swagger, you should see the Swagger UI. Now I can come in here. I can go to order post. I can actually say try it out. I can enter an ID, which it wants a GUID. So we'll come back here, say generate GUID. We'll copy that in there. Customer number 1234. What did we get? Oh, we actually got a 200. It actually worked. So if we come back here, what do we see? Oh, nothing in there, but we did get a 200. We do have a timestamp. Our order ID is empty. That's bad news because we passed a GUID and we didn't get an order back, and we didn't get our customer number back. So that's something we can investigate. We should have got it back, but we didn't. So let's go see why. So let's kill that app. Let's go over here. We know we started up. We got Swagger working, which is like Postman built in. Thank you very much. My guess is that our consumer didn't do what it said it was going to. Did exactly what I asked it to instead of what I said to do. So let's take the order ID and get that from context.message.order_ID, and we'll get context.message.customer number. So you can see, and I got to remember that I've glossed over a lot of stuff here, but the consume context of submit order, that context includes a whole bunch of things. That includes the message, which actually has, the submit order message contract in it. So all the properties are going to be there. There are also a whole bunch of headers within the message. So context is going to have freeform headers. It's going to have the host information of the host that sent it, the expiration time, fault addresses, sent time, basically all the source address, a lot of routing headers, message IDs, details that are part of that original message or in that message context. And if I go back to the controller here, I can see that that was there. So now if I run this here, I'm going to try to actually run this inside the project and see if it runs. Oh, yeah, I didn't want to do that. Yeah, that's why I didn't do that. Okay, so if I refresh this here, now I'm going to have to try it out again. I'm going to have to get a new GUID. Generate GUID, copy, paste it in here. Let's get a customer number. Oh, and I actually got the data back. So I was wrong. It doesn't actually put your request message in there. I thought that was too much magic when I did it, but maybe it doesn't. So now I can see that I have my order ID in here. I have the appropriate values and everything. Since I am running this in the editor right now, let's look at what the F5 story looks like here. So I'm going to put a breakpoint here. I'm going to go back to the browser, and I'm going to execute it again with another number in there. So I got into my controller, I got my customer number, I have my ID, everything looks good. I'm going to go into this get response. I'm going to initialize this. At this point, I'm going to set a breakpoint here. So when I get back, because everything is async and everything is going to be running in separate threads. So I'm going to go back to my consumer. I'm going to set a breakpoint here. So within my order, I'm going to just say go. And I can see within the message reception, I actually have within the context a bunch of header values, such as conversation ID, which is a value created by MassTransit. Any message that's passed through in this conversation, such as the request and the response, is always going to have the same conversation ID. I don't have a correlation ID or an initiation ID. I have the actual submit order message, which if you look, it actually is a dynamic internal backing implementation of that sample contract submit order type, and it has the different values that are in there. The message ID is generated by MassTransit. The request ID, this is generated when you do a request, and it's used to correlate the response back. So the request ID is always going to be unique for a request, and the response on the receiving end will have that same value. The response address, everything's in memory, so you can see it's kind of like faking out that it's in memory, going to the response. And it has the timestamp that it was sent, which is in UTC, because here in Central Time it's 2:41, and that's 7:40. There's also supported message types, which I probably won't cover in this segment, but just to know that message types, yeah, actually I probably should kind of go into deal in this. So the submit order contract that I created, it's in the namespace sample.contracts. And so you see there's a URN created in here within this array, URN message sample contracts submit order. Message contracts, they use the full namespace. So if you're trying to build a bunch of different projects and you're putting the message contract in different projects and putting them in different namespaces, MassTransit will not recognize that as the same message. It looks at the actual namespace and everything because it needs to know that it is actually the same message. So some people freak out because it shows like the namespace doesn't match their project, but that's for people that want to put their contracts in the different projects and not to have a central project or an assembly that has all of those in it. That's just something to get over and just accept that that's part of the naming. Question in the chat, why is the message being proxied? The message is being proxied because it is an interface. So when I go to the submit order type, it is an interface. And the backing implementation of that is created dynamically by MassTransit. It has a dynamic implementation builder, which essentially just makes a fake class in the background so that it can set the properties on it. Yeah, so that way it, yeah, because otherwise I would have to like create a derived version of the submit order. Yeah, I don't put eyes on my interfaces because I don't like it. So that's something that's going to be there. But yeah. So yeah, submit order is an interface. If it was a class, and I could totally make this a class with getters and setters, and it would send the class as is. I've always used interfaces for message types. It's kind of how my brain thinks. So I'm going to send this response. I'm going to initialize it. It's going to get this timestamp variable, which is going to initialize that. It's going to copy the order ID and the customer number from the customer. We'll skip over that. And if I F10 that, I get another response over there. Now I get computed. I'm going to F10 that. It's going to be great. Oh, did the HTTP request timeout? I bet there's nobody left. Yeah, I bet it did. There we go. So let me execute this again. So yeah, so now it's going to call it again. I'm going to go real quick. I'm going to go real quick. And now I get back and I see in my response, I have the message accepted. I have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, all of that there. The timestamp is the timestamp current. I'll return that as JSON. And if I go back to the browser, I can see that I got that data back there. So take a breath for a second, relax. So what's covered so far on this is the creation. I'm going to go ahead and stop this project. So all of this is in memory. It's all currently using Mediator. I'm not using any sort of message transport. I'm not using anything that requires me to put any infrastructure in. And I've managed to decouple the processing of that submit order command into a separate class. And I have my submit order consumer. Now I could do actually work here. I could put some delays in there. I could, simulate all that. I could go out and, validate that the order has, a valid customer number, any of that type of stuff. When it comes to orders, and I think Amazon has definitely taught us this, is accept the order whenever possible, because if there's anything wrong with it, we can work that out on the back end, or if systems are unavailable, we can work that out on the back end. The intent is to get the order and get the customer, checked out so that you can then start processing it, and, not delay the response to them. So I'm going to just do a little hygiene here while I rest my brain for a second and delete this weather forecast thing, because that was just part of the default project that's created when we started up. So what have we done so far? We've used the add MassTransit extension methods. That's part of the MassTransit.ASP.NET Core project. We've put a consumer in here for our submit order consumer. We added a request client for submit order, and we added the mediator, which is again just an in-memory implementation of MassTransit. We created our consumer class, the submit order consumer. We created our message contracts for submit order, order submission accepted, and we've put that into the controller to call that with the request client. The request client is injected via the constructor. The controller is resolved using whatever ASP.NET does to that. We added Swagger so that we could actually call and test the API without having to run Postman or curl. And we put the post in the response. So I think the next thing that I'm going to cover is how to do two responses. So typically, if someone's submitting a request or any type of data you're putting in, you're going to want to do like some initial level validation of it. And if you're not going to do that in the controller, you might want to be doing that inside your. That's funny. Never check your messages while you're speaking. That's rule number one. So anyway, okay, so order submission accepted. Let's say I'm going to have an order submission rejected. I don't want to actually take the, I'm going to do some validation and I'm going to add that. So I'm going to create another message contract here. I'm going to call it rejected. I'm going to put a reason on here. And I'm going to go back to my consumer now. And I'm going to add something to this consumer. So let's just say if context.message.customer number contains test. In this case, now consumers they run in their own thread. They're running in response to a message. They're invoked by a mass transit. So it's kind of the Hollywood principle. Don't call us, we'll call you. Just like an API controller or anything in ASP.NET, I think most people are kind of used to this model now where you create a class, you put some methods on it, and then the runtime is responsible for invoking your methods, passing you the data. That's exactly what's happening with a consumer. It's actually going out to the DI container. It's creating a new instance of the consumer, passing it any dependencies that it has, and then calling the consume method on that consumer. So to demonstrate that a little bit, let me put this in here. Let's go ahead and create a constructor on this. And let's take in a logger. So, ASP.NET now, iLogger factory and iLogger are pretty ubiquitous. So let's create our submit order consumer. And we'll call this logger. We'll put this into a field. We'll take this on the constructor. And now, because we want to do this, we will do logger dot is enabled log level debug, which I don't know if it is or not. Let's not even bother with that. Let's just do logger.log log level debug. Where's like my message version? Yeah, so let's see here, submit order consumer colon, and we'll put customer number context.message.customer number. So now I've added to where I've taken on the constructor dependency iLogger. It could be any dependency you have. If you have stuff configured in your container, like a validation component or anything that's been registered in the container can be resolved by the consumer. We'll save this out, we'll run it. We'll go back here. Should come up pretty quickly. We'll refresh, we'll try it out. We will again go back and get a GUID because we need one. We will create our customer number, hello, 123. We get our response back. And now if we actually go out here, we don't have debug logging configured. So we will go back here and change this to info so that it shows up. Actually, I'll change my logging level to debug. We'll run it. We'll go back here again. We will try it again. We will get our response. And now we can actually see some more kind of stuff going on here. So first we have our actual log message where we say the submit or consumer is logging out. Here we see an additional message, mass transit received transport. Mass transit is actually showing that it received a message of type order submission accepted because we use the request client back on the other side. And we also have the Mediator endpoint that received the submit order message. So these debug messages are all logged out. They're all standard logger factory messages. They can be filtered as, just like anything else. The interesting thing to see is that the received message is actually logged after the consumer has completed. The response was actually received and processed before it actually finished processing the actual command. So submit order finished processing after the response was received and returned by the API controller. So again, the TPL, it's interesting to see how the threads are dispatched and how stuff is moved around. But at least this way you can kind of see how the application is processing the messages and have that track in there, including the timestamps of how long it takes. In this case, I think it took a microsecond to, I don't know, a millisecond to actually process the response. Anyway, yeah, so fun times. And every time I refresh this, it's going to do the same thing. I mean, if I go out here, you're going to see those log messages in there. The key one being that one that I added to the logger that is actually within the consumer for that log debug based on that dependency injected logger. So again, it creates a new instance of every consumer, so it isn't like one consumer is shared, so you can't just put a variable in it and expect the next message process to have access to that variable. It isn't static. Definitely don't recommend that. If you do have state that you need to maintain between consumers, create an external dependency that has a life cycle that matches that, because all of the consumers are registered as scoped in the container, so they'll always create a new instance for every request. So we'll kill that. So now back to where I was talking about is, so if the customer number contains test, I want to return a different response. I want to return a response that says respond async. And in this case, I'm going to say order submission rejected. And for the rejected message, I'm going to return the same values from here, except now I'm going to add a reason of test customer cannot submit orders. And we'll even put the context.message.customer number in there. And then we'll return that instead, and then we'll break out of that because we don't want to do anything else there. Now, if I go back to my controller, I'm going to add an additional response type to this. So I'm going to say, or I can get order submission rejected. And I'm going to turn this into a var. And in this case, I'm going to say accepted, rejected. So .NET supports tuples now, and this, because I have two different response types, I will support two different types. So here I can say if accepted is completed successfully, then I know that the order was accepted and I can return OK and everything will be awesome. In this case, I will await accepted. Let's see, I guess we'll just return this to response because that's the response we used. If it wasn't, then I will await the other one. So in this case, I will, wish there was a nicer way to do this. I don't know what it is with tuples. I'm definitely open to suggestions there. In this case, I'll return, wow, what would be a good message for not accepted? Conflict, challenge, annoying, error, failed. Isn't a not found? .401, what's it called? What's the name? Problem? I don't know what that is. Let's go see. Bad request. Oh, I like bad request, but that's, that's crazy. Oh, 500 is a problem. Yeah, we don't want to have a problem. Ooh, validation problem. Which code is that? Bad request. Oh, yeah, okay. So bad request. Nice. In this case, we'll say bad request response.message. 401, you're right, that's not authorized. 400 sounds good. Okay, so we'll return a bad request. Now we'll go in, create our code, we'll run it. We'll go back to here, we'll execute this again. Hello works, but now we're gonna say test 1, 2, 3. Boom, 400 bad requests. Test customer could not submit orders. Test 1, 2, 3. So now we've added validation. We've added a different response type. Worked great. We create a valid 1, 2, 3 and execute it. It's going to run properly. It's going to return a 200. Actually, it should probably return accepted instead of just a 200. So we'll change that to be nice and friendly. We'll kill this. Go back to here. We'll execute it again. Now we're going to get a 202 accepted. And we're all set there. Go back to test 1, 2, 3. Boom, we get the 400 undocumented. Oh, that's, yeah. So the way Swagger works is I think I have to put like properties in here to tell it what result codes return which things. And I would have to dig into that to remember what they are, but I'm not going to deal with that right now. I just did that so I would be able to test these easily. So that's kind of like the get started. I mean, that's, using Mediator in memory, that's getting it to where it's started up and configured. I think I'm going to take a break for a few minutes, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to add RabbitMQ to it to where it's like now you want to take it out and you want to put it in a separate service and not run it within the same web API. Appreciate any comments or feedback. If you do want to learn more about mass transit, we do have the Mass Transit project website. We have the Mass Transit Discord. So if you go into Discord, you can actually go in and see. You can go in and actually see mass transit and read about it and all that kind of fun stuff. So, report, yeah, nice. But yeah, so I'm going to stop for a little bit. I'll probably be back on in probably less than half an hour and kind of go over adding, a separate Windows service, or not Windows service, but a console service that is going to bring up the consumer in RabbitMQ and then set it up so the web API is able to call out through RabbitMQ. So thanks for the first step. We'll catch you back on the next one. Thanks, everyone.